April 16th, 2025, a date that could have gone down as one of the darkest days in African history. Behind the scenes, a terrifying plan was unfolding. A group of traitors conspired to assassinate President Traoré and plunge Burkina Faso into chaos. And they weren't acting alone. These conspirators joined forces with terrorist groups, preparing to unleash coordinated attacks on innocent civilians and the Burkinabe military. It was a plot so well crafted, it nearly succeeded. But then, something incredible happened. Brave soldiers within the Burkinabe Armed Forces refused to betray their country. They exposed the plan, choosing loyalty over treachery. But here's where things get even more disturbing. The mastermind behind this failed coup didn't vanish into thin air. No, they fled to Ivory Coast, and instead of facing justice, they were welcomed. Now ask yourself, why would a fellow African country shelter someone who tried to tear apart a neighboring nation? Is this just politics, or is something much deeper at play? Let's dig in. According to the Burkinabe Minister of Security, one of the key figures behind this deadly plot is someone no one expected, Ibrahim Abdain, not just an outsider or a rebel, but a respected officer from within, a senior member of the Burkinabe Military Justice Battalion. Think about that. A man trusted with the nation's security, turned into its enemy. Barry had access to top-level, highly sensitive military intel, and instead of protecting it, he handed it over to terrorist leaders fully aware of the destruction it could cause. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip. It was a calculated betrayal. He knew innocent lives would be lost, and he did it anyway. For what? Power? Revenge? Money? Barry didn't just betray the government. He betrayed every Burkinabe citizen who believes in peace, in unity, and in a future free from foreign-backed chaos. This is the kind of betrayal that tears nations apart from within. But Barry didn't act alone. He used his influence to pull others into his twisted mission. Fellow officers within the Burkinabe Armed Forces, men who once swore to protect the nation, were lured with promises of power, wealth, and high-ranking positions. If only they helped bring down Traoré. Even worse, Barry reached out to the militia group VDM. He paid them off, urged them to turn against the very country they were meant to defend, and planted seeds of betrayal in their minds. It wasn't just a coup attempt, it was a psychological war, and Barry was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. And then, he vanished, just like that, gone without a trace. For weeks, no one knew where he had disappeared to, until Burkina Faso's intelligence office made a chilling discovery. Barry had fled to Ivory Coast. According to intelligence sources, the plan to assassinate Traoré and throw Burkina Faso into total chaos is still alive. It's being coordinated from Abidjan, Ivory Coast. The new goal? To strike before June 2025. This isn't just treason, it's war from the shadows, and the clock is ticking. So they failed on April 16th, but instead of backing down, they just changed the date. Now the new deadline is sometime before June 2025. That's not just alarming, it's heartbreaking. For years, we've pointed fingers at the West for sowing chaos and division across Africa. But what do you do when the ones causing destruction are your own people? These traitors, these Burkinabe citizens, have turned against everything their country stands for. Peace, stability, progress, they don't care. They've shut their eyes to the transformation under Traoré, the bold reforms, the national pride, the hope. Why? Why would any African choose to help outsiders tear down what we're finally starting to build? And then comes the part that makes it even more painful. Ivory Coast. A neighboring country, our supposed brother, has chosen to protect these traitors. Think about that. Instead of standing with Burkina Faso, instead of working with our authorities to bring these criminals to justice, they've rolled out the red carpet. Not a single word of condemnation, not a single official statement. Just silence. The kind of silence that speaks volumes. And it doesn't stop there. These enemies of the Burkinabe people haven't just been given shelter, they've been granted asylum, a safe haven to keep plotting, planning, and undermining peace. Now let's be honest. The reason is obvious to anyone paying attention. The presidency of Ivory Coast isn't acting on its own. It's a puppet, controlled by the same hands that have meddled in African affairs for decades, France. Alassane Ouattara didn't rise to power on his own. Let's not forget, his 2011 takeover came with the full support of France, and ever since, he's played his part, protecting French interests, not African unity. So yes, it's clear, this isn't just political, it's personal, it's strategic, and it's dangerous. The question now is, what will Burkina Faso do next? And more importantly, what will Africa do about its own betrayals? Let's go deeper. The story of Alassane Ouattara isn't just about politics. It's about long-term strategy and manipulation that began decades ago. Back in 1968, a young Ouattara was just 26 years old when France stepped in and handpicked him for a role at the International Monetary Fund. That was the beginning of a carefully crafted plan. With France pulling the strings, his rise was no coincidence. His path was fast-tracked, doors opened effortlessly, and by 1973, he was appointed chargé de mission at the Central Bank of West African States, conveniently stationed in Paris. Just 2 years later, another promotion. Then, in 1983, France ensured he became vice governor of the BCEAO. Piece by piece, the puppet was being positioned. But here's where the game gets even dirtier. While grooming Ouattara for leadership, France was simultaneously working behind the scenes to cripple Ivory Coast's economy. Yes, the same country they claimed to be helping. Policies were manipulated, growth was stifled, and slowly, the economy began to collapse. It was no accident, it was sabotage, perfectly timed. Because once Ivory Coast found itself desperate, drowning in economic crisis, France unveiled its solution. Enter Ouattara, the same man they had groomed for years, the one they had placed in every key financial institution. Now he was presented as the savior, the man who could rescue Ivory Coast. But it was never about saving the country, it was about control. And that's exactly how France embedded its influence into Ivorian leadership, not with tanks or coups, but with economics, manipulation, and a man named Alassane Ouattara. As Ivory Coast's economy spiraled deeper into crisis, France didn't back down. It doubled down, and so did its plans for Alassane Ouattara. With full French support, Ouattara returned to the International Monetary Fund. This time, not just as an economist, but as director of the African department. Simultaneously, he was made counselor to the IMF's managing director. He was being positioned on the world stage with a dual role designed to boost his international profile. 4 years later, he was sent back to the Central Bank of West African States, but not just as any official. He returned as governor of the bank, and of course, the position was conveniently based in France. By then, Ivory Coast's economy was on life support. The damage had been done. And for France, the time was finally right. The trap had been set. France needed to plant their puppet inside the Ivorian government, so they did what they do best: manipulation behind closed doors. Somehow they convinced President Houphouët-Boigny, the aging father of the nation, to appoint Ouattara as head of the country's economic stabilization program in 1990. They framed him as the economic savior, the man who could fix everything. But this wasn't about fixing anything. It was about legitimacy, about painting Ouattara as a national hero in the eyes of the public. And there was one more factor France was counting on: time. President Houphouët-Boigny was dying. He had undergone prostate cancer surgery in France, and the French government knew his health was failing. They knew the clock was ticking, so they moved fast. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted, and by the end of 1990, France had its way. President Houphouët-Boigny, weak, ailing, and vulnerable, was pressured into appointing Alassane Ouattara as Prime Minister of Ivory Coast. It was a masterstroke. France now had their man not just in the economy, but in political power. A puppet with a suit and a smile, ready to serve the interests of Paris, not Abidjan. At that point, France had done it. Their long-term mission was complete. They had successfully installed their man, their puppet, into one of the highest offices in Ivory Coast. With Alassane Ouattara as Prime Minister, everything was finally falling into place. The only thing left was to secure total loyalty and France had a plan for that too. In 1991, as a reward for his obedience and usefulness, France offered Ouattara more than just political support. They gave him something far more symbolic: a wife. That year, Ouattara married Dominique Claudine Nouvion, a French woman, deeply rooted in the elite circles of France. This wasn't just a romantic union, it was a political seal, a binding contract, a message to the world that Ouattara's destiny was now forever intertwined with that of France. But here's the part few people know. This marriage wasn't just celebrated, it was sanctioned. It was approved by none other than the former president of France himself. In fact, the man who officiated the wedding ceremony was Nicolas Sarkozy, at the time, mayor of Neuilly-sur-Seine. Yes, the very same Sarkozy who would later become president of France. So ask yourself, what kind of African leader needs the approval of the French presidency to marry? This wasn't just a wedding, a symbolic confirmation that Ouattara was now France's man in West Africa, not just in office, but in life. Sarkozy officiating Ouattara's wedding wasn't just a gesture, it was a preview of things to come. Because years later, that very same Sarkozy would play a central role in making sure Ouattara would not just serve France, but rule Côte d'Ivoire as its president. But that power grab didn't happen overnight. France had a blueprint and they executed it step by step. After securing the prime minister's office for Ouattara, the next goal was clear: the presidency. So, what did France do? They began shaping the political battlefield to clear his path. One by one, any figure who could potentially challenge Ouattara, anyone who wasn't loyal to France, was strategically removed or discredited. Whether inside the government or outside of it, it didn't matter. If France saw you as a threat to their puppet's rise, you were dealt with. And then came the country's first multi-party elections in 1990, a pivotal moment, a chance for democracy to take root. But what happened instead? One of Ouattara's first acts as prime minister was to imprison Laurent Gbagbo, the only real opposition candidate, along with his wife, Simone Veil. That wasn't about law and order. That was about eliminating competition. That was about making sure the Ivorian people never got to choose a leader who wasn't approved by France. Because Ouattara's real job as prime minister was never to serve the Ivorian people. It was to protect France's interests, politically, economically, and strategically. He wasn't just leading a government. He was executing a foreign agenda, and the strings were being pulled from Paris. After the death of President Houphouët-Boigny, chaos loomed over Côte d'Ivoire, and in the confusion, Alassane Ouattara made his move. Ignoring the late president's wishes, who had handpicked Henri Konan Bédié as his rightful successor, Ouattara tried to seize power for himself. He didn't wait. He didn't consult. He simply appointed himself as successor. Of course, France stood right behind him, ready to back their puppet with full force. But the Ivorian people? They stood behind Bédié. Because to them, Ouattara wasn't one of their own. He was seen as an outsider, not just politically, but culturally. His deep ties to France, the former colonial master, made many Ivorians question his loyalty. Was he truly Ivorian, or just France's instrument? Thankfully, the people's voice prevailed. Bédié rose to power as interim president in 1993, dealing a heavy blow to France's plans and to Ouattara's ambitions. But France wasn't done. They pulled Ouattara back to the global stage for a reset. In 1994, he was appointed one of the 3 deputy managing directors of the IMF, a position of prestige, yes, but more importantly, a position of power and strategy. France knew they would call him back when the time was right, and they did. In 1999, France needed Ouattara back in Ivorian politics, but there was one problem, a secret that's been quietly buried in official narratives. Ouattara isn't fully Ivorian. His roots trace back to Burkina Faso, and while this fact may seem irrelevant on the surface, it shaped everything. It was the reason he was barred from the 1995 presidential elections, and why Bédié once again claimed victory. But here's the twist. That Burkinabe origin may also explain something happening right now. Ouattara's interference in Burkina Faso's affairs. Not out of brotherhood, but out of strategy, on behalf of France. And trust me, we're going to dive deeper into that connection very soon. Just when it seemed like the dust was settling, everything changed again. Before the 2000 elections could even take place, President Henri Konan Bédié, the man chosen by the people, was suddenly overthrown in a military coup. To this day, no one can say exactly what happened behind the scenes, but the timing, it's too perfect to ignore. The coup came just 4 months after Alassane Ouattara resigned from the IMF and returned to Ivory Coast. Coincidence? Maybe. But many reports allege that France was behind the coup, once again pulling strings to clear the path for their man. But even with Bédié out of the way, there was still a problem. Ouattara was still ineligible to run in the 2000 elections, thanks to his Burkinabe roots. So who won? The very man Ouattara had jailed years earlier, Laurent Gbagbo. The tables had turned. Gbagbo rose to power, and France was furious. And when France gets angry, it doesn't throw tantrums. It wages economic war. Over the next 10 years, France used every tool at its disposal to undermine Gbagbo. They didn't just disapprove of his presidency, they set out to cripple it. They activated Ouattara's allies inside global institutions, especially the IMF, to put Ivory Coast in financial chokehold. Aid was cut. Loans were blocked. Debt restructuring was sabotaged. The goal? Isolate Gbagbo and make him look like a failure. But France didn't stop at economic warfare. In 2002, just 2 years into Gbagbo's presidency, civil war erupted, and once again, the pattern is too clear to ignore. France is widely believed to have backed the rebellion by arming Ouattara's loyalists in the northern regions. These weren't just rogue fighters. They were strategically placed to divide the country and trigger chaos. Sound familiar? Because this isn't just history, it's the exact same playbook they're running right now. In Burkina Faso, destabilization, a puppet waiting in the wings, and foreign hands hiding in the shadows. The question is, how many times will Africa fall for the same trap? The chaos that unfolded next wasn't accidental, it was engineered. Ouattara's northern rebels, trained and armed, unleashed deliberate violence. The result? A brutal civil war that tore Côte d'Ivoire in two. The north fell under the control of Ouattara's forces. The south remained loyal to the democratically elected president, Laurent Gbagbo. This was the perfect excuse for France to make its move. Under the pretense of restoring peace, French troops were deployed, not as peacekeepers, but as power enforcers, backing their man in the north. And yet, the war raged on for nearly a decade. 10 years of bloodshed, death, and destruction, an entire generation born into conflict, an economy in ruins, a nation on its knees. Then came November 2010, a presidential election amidst the wreckage. The people were exhausted, worn out, desperate for anything that resembled hope. And that's when France played its final card. They presented Alassane Ouattara, the same man behind the war, behind the division, as the savior. With international backing and military support from France, Ouattara launched a final assault. He and his rebel army swept through the country. They didn't campaign, they conquered. But it wasn't clean. For over 3 months, the nation burned. Fierce fighting erupted between Gbagbo's forces and Ouattara's French-backed rebels. The death toll climbed, and Abidjan, the economic heart of Côte d'Ivoire, became a war zone. And then came the most haunting chapter. As Ouattara's forces marched toward the presidential palace, they left behind a trail of horror. Thousands of civilians were slaughtered. In one village alone, over 1,000 people were massacred. Innocent lives erased. And this was the man France called a savior? A man who rode to power on the back of civil war, foreign troops, and mass killings? This wasn't liberation. It was a hostile takeover disguised as democracy. And now, he's doing the same thing to Burkina Faso. Different country, same playbook, same puppet, same master. But even with all the bloodshed, Laurent Gbagbo did not go down easily. He and loyal members of the Ivorian army stood their ground. So what did Ouattara do when resistance grew too strong? He called his old friend, Nicolas Sarkozy, now president of France. And just like that, the final act began. On April 3rd, Sarkozy ordered French elite forces to protect Ouattara inside a luxury hotel in Abidjan. turning it into a command center. Then, without any mandate from the Ivorian people, Sarkozy sent 1,500 French soldiers to Gbagbo's residence. They didn't just surround it, they obliterated it. Helicopter strikes, tank missiles. The presidential residence was reduced to rubble. Gbagbo was finally captured, and France's puppet Alassane Ouattara was officially placed on the throne. That was 2011, and since that day, Ivory Coast has never been ruled by Ivorians alone. France, quietly, cunningly, has continued to pull the strings behind the scenes, and now we are seeing the exact same script playing out in Burkina Faso. Just think about it. Traoré is not just another leader. He is France's worst nightmare, a bold, unapologetic anti-imperialist, cut from the same cloth as Thomas Sankara. He has dared to say no to France. He has exposed their lies, and worst of all, he has inspired a revolution in the Sahel that's turning the tide of African history. Because of Traoré and the military leaders of Mali and Niger, France has lost control. No more uranium from Niger, no more gold from Burkina Faso. France is furious. So what do? They go back to what they know best: destabilization and puppetry, the assassination plot against Traoré, the rebels, the safe haven in Ivory Coast. It's the same old playbook: create chaos, fund insiders, protect the traitors, and when the time is right, replace the revolutionary with a puppet. But this time, the world is watching. Africa is watching. And the question is no longer, what is France doing? The real question is, will Africa let history repeat itself, or will it finally break the cycle? If France wanted to remove Traoré and regain control of Burkina Faso, what better tool could they use than their own puppet, the President of Ivory Coast? President Traoré has been sounding the alarm for months, warning that Ivory Coast is working with France to destabilize Burkina Faso. But many didn't believe him. They thought it was just political rhetoric. Now, the truth is undeniable. The very traitors who plotted to kill Traoré have fled to Ivory Coast. Why? Because that's where the entire plan was born. That's where the orders came from. And here's the part that makes it even clearer. President Ouattara, France's loyal enforcer, has Burkinabe roots. Yes, Ouattara's origin ties directly to Burkina Faso. He has family there, long-standing connections, networks. So when France gave the green light to deal with Traoré and restore control, who better to activate the mission than someone with one foot in Côte d'Ivoire and the other in Burkina Faso? That's what we believe happened. That's what the evidence is beginning to show: a puppet president, a foreign master, and a covert operation to eliminate one of the last anti-imperialist voices in Africa. But this time, the plan is exposed, and the people, not just of Burkina Faso, but across the continent, are waking up. With France backing him financially and politically, President Ouattara of Ivory Coast didn't just offer shelter to the traitors targeting Burkina Faso, he set up an operations center for them. They were given access to Ivorian resources, protected by the state, and allowed to build a detailed plan to take out President Traoré and destabilize the entire nation. But something happened they didn't expect. The plan failed, and now these traitors have fled straight back to their base of operations in Abidjan, hiding in plain sight under the protection of Ouattara. Besides this, Ivory Coast has been targeting Traoré in recent times. The Ivorian media has written disparaging remarks about Traoré. They have called him a dictator. They have called him incompetent, seeking to destroy his image before the world. They have accused him of committing genocide. It would also interest you to know that this is not the first time that Ivory Coast has been involved in coup attempts against Traoré. According to reports, Ouattara has been in collusion with France in at least 3 coup attempts in neighboring Burkina Faso to topple President Traoré. Ouattara reportedly funneled funds from the French to military renegades within the Burkina Faso army to facilitate President Traoré's ousting. And this is exactly why President Ibrahim Traoré issued a bold warning last year, one that many dismissed at the time, but is now proving to be tragically true. Standing before thousands at the Palais des Sports in Ouagadougou, Traoré didn't mince his words. He called out the true enemy, not just terrorists, but the imperialists who fuel chaos from the shadows. He pointed the finger squarely at France, accusing it of wanting to plunder Burkina Faso and destabilize not just his country, but the entire West African region. Traoré said it loud and clear: "We have nothing against the Ivorian people, but we have something against whoever governs Ivory Coast." He exposed what was then a controversial claim. There is an operational center in Abidjan, funded by France and backed by Benin and Ivory Coast, whose mission is to destabilize Burkina Faso. Back then, many called it paranoia. But look around now. The traitors have fled straight to Abidjan, the exact city Traoré warned about. The very plan he spoke of has unfolded step by step. And that brings us to the harsh reality. What kind of Africa are we living in, where one country works with foreign powers to destroy another? We keep saying we want unity, but how can there be unity when betrayal has become a currency? When leaders like Ouattara are willing to sell out their neighbors for power? This is the core of Africa's crisis. Our borders may say we are sovereign, but our actions often reveal we are divided, vulnerable, and manipulated. When will we learn? As long as Africans like Ouattara and those traitors within our ranks are willing to betray their people for personal gain, we will remain stuck in the same cycle: foreign control, internal chaos, and stolen futures. But change is possible. Change will come the day Africans rise, not just in protest, but in principle. The day we choose loyalty over bribes, unity over betrayal, patriotism over puppetry, because only then will Africa finally begin to heal. Only then will leaders like Traoré not stand alone. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and share this video.